Hey, it's Mark. I'm back with another exciting episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week we talked to Scott Huesing. And this guy is a badass Marine. And he was involved in one of the most harrowing battle warfares ever in Iraq. And he's got a book out called Echo in Ramadi. And essentially this was this incredible hand-to-hand type combat, just firefight for 2 years. And he lived through it. He was a commanding officer, and just incredible tale of being in the most intense situations, and fortunately for him, making his way out of it successfully. And so he goes back and relives that. So very interesting all the way through. I will say that he called me Matt throughout the podcast, and I let that go. And I only wanted to bust his you know what on the way out. So if you hear that, he probably is embarrassed for hearing that right now, but that's my payback for you. So we got that straightened out. But anyways, this guy, he's a good guy, just outstanding. And I want to read this just really quick. He details his first-hand account of Echo Company's 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and their bloody battles in the deadliest city in the Iraq War. I mean, just that alone would make my hair stand up, which it did. So I interviewed him when I was literally moving out. So you'll hear a bunch of background noise, but you know, that was nothing new to him with having lived through what he did in Iraq. And we got through it on a very rainy day in Hermosa Beach. So on that note, we'll get to him in a second. But if you want to find out anything more about what I'm up to, MarkPattisonNFL.com, and always remember to go in and rate and review if you can on Apple iTunes, which you can find through my website. Okay, so on that note, let's go talk to Scott. Here we go. Hey, it's Mark Pattison back again with my final episode of Finding Your Summit from Hermosa Beach as I prepare to move to Sun Valley, Idaho. And in the midst of all this chaos in my house, I've got a total stud military war hero, Scott Huesing. Scott, how you doing?
Great. It's great to be here on your battlefield, which is what this place looks like right now.
Oh, it's amazing.
It is madness right now, but I've moved probably 15 times in my 24-year career in the Marines, so I know all too well.
Well, it's, we've got a bunch of things going on here. Number one, we're moving in total chaos. Number two, I have a house cleaner trying to do the final, sweep up. And as you can see, it looks like, a Cat 5 came through here. And then to boot, it, as you know, you live down in Temecula, and it rarely rains in Southern California. And here we are, one of the rainiest days of the year. All the factors coming together. Perfect. It is perfect.
What I define in Echo in Ramadi is friction. That indescribable pressure that just comes down at you at the worst moments, and you don't have any control over it, but you still battle through, you still fight through it, and it's there.
Well, listen, I want to get to that. And we were introduced by a common bud and absolute stud, Pete Turner. Yeah, I mean, he came up here and we did pods on each other, and just the more I've gotten to know him, I'm working on another project right now in Everest for next year. I mean, talk about a total stud, non-self-serving, giving type guy that is just really there to serve.
Yeah. I talked to Pete on the way up here. He called me because he's got a book idea, and I was introduced to him, through Mark Valley. He's an actor.
Sure.
Worked with him a little bit at the Writers Guild in LA, and it's this amazing network of veteran supporters, guys that love doing, not talking about stuff, doing stuff, and really opening up their house like you are today. I mean, literally. But really, you open up your connections, and not a lot of people are willing to do that and say, hey, I want you to meet this guy. He's authentic. He's not in it for himself, and Pete's a great example of that. Mark's a great example of that. I mean, I'm really fortunate to have such a great network with so many cool people in it.
Yeah, so right before we went on live here, you were talking about the power of connection. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's not just a buzz line or, a bumper sticker. Because when I wrote the book, a lot of people ask me, how long did it take you to write the book? Well, it's really a long time, but...
So let's just put a quick little insert in there. The best-selling book, Echo in Ramadi.
Correct.
Right? Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I just want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, so, as I wrote the stories and I did, over 75 interviews with the Marines and the families of those who supported us while we fought and the soldiers, is you look at things through a different lens when you get to a certain stage in your life. As you know, it's age and wisdom that you gain. But I noticed all these connecting points throughout the characters, and they are characters to me. They're real people, obviously, but there was something about them that before they even joined the military, before they raised their hand to serve their country at age 18 in most cases, and these families who raised them, there was this thing that they all had, and one of these connecting points, and it was a willingness to serve others. And they may have grown up and wanted to be a veterinarian or a doctor or a cop, but ultimately they wound up in the military. So I went through all of these, and that struck me, in addition to how young they really were as they served. And it's amazing to me to have this small segment of the American population, which is less than 1/2 of 1% out of 330 million people in this country, Matt. Those are the people that serve in our military. And the fact that the families they leave behind are still with them as they fight, they were really a huge factor in our success as we fought and won in the deadly streets of Ramadi in 2006 and 2007 during the surge strategy. And they still remain a huge part of how we stay connected as we heal, and as some of the guys go through the darkness that they still deal with from the things they've done, from the things they can't unsee, and from the things that they were ordered to do at such a very young age, 18, 19, 20 years old. And that power of human connection, that is something that is real. And without it, I wouldn't have been able to share this story, which is unlike anything else that has been written about, because it's not about a battlefield chronology. Yeah, it's about the fighting and the friction and what those guys go through as they fought street to street, house to house, room to room in the deadliest city of Iraq. But it's about how that brotherhood is really true and how well they took care of each other, better than anything else I've ever known in my entire life, and how our families still stay so inextricably connected to us. And I always say this too, Matt, is we weren't some high speed, elite unit fighting it for the Marine Corps. We were an infantry company, and we had some specialized training, but there were plenty of guys that fought harder than us, that lost more than us, and suffered as equal, if not more, than we did. But that chemistry, that link that we had, this brotherhood that still binds us to this day, is really something I think that helped us not only fight and win in the city of Ramadi, and we did win. I always like to make that abundantly clear. We won that fight, but it keeps us connected today. Yeah,
I also think one of the things you just said is it's always relevant to your own situation. So you just mentioned that other guys may have played harder, faster, stronger, won more battles, lost more. But you weren't in those battles. All you know is what was real to you, and just like all they knew is what. It's always hindsight when you look back on it and go, wow, I can't believe they actually experienced that, right? Another thing you just talked about was this brotherhood. And I find from my experience, and you see this all the time, and you hear this a lot from ex-professional sports people, where they just go, so what is the gap? What do you miss most about the game? It's not spring training. It's not, catching the last second touchdown. Those moments were fantastic, but it's about the locker room. It's about the brotherhood that we all went through, all the battles, barely making, of the entire population, just like you, only 1% of the guys are out there that can make it, that do make it, that play. And so it's a special moment when you get out there, you actually make it through the grind, just like your grind, and then survive that. Now we're talking about an apple and orange here. We're talking about going out and entertaining and playing for a profession. And you're talking about risking your life to protect your country. So, but I think that there's a parallel. And I see that, I've had other Navy SEALs on. I've had other guys like Pete Turner that come on, and there's just this gap, right? For when you guys come back to the States, on all of a sudden now you're going back to your normal lives. And so there's a real, missing point in terms of that brotherhood that you guys experience in those intense situations.
Yeah, well, I think it's ironic. The analogy that I use most often to describe what we endured when we fought is a football analogy. And a lot of Americans and a lot of listeners to this really have a hard time understanding that. And the way I explain to them is like, imagine you're a pro football player. Imagine you're doing 2 days in summer camp and spring training, and you're training all week long, and then Sunday rolls around and there's no game. How does that make you feel? So for the Marines and soldiers and everybody that serves and puts on that uniform, they train for weeks and months and sometimes years on end to get to that game. And when we were in Ramadi in 2006 and 2007, as an infantry officer, as an infantryman, period, it was game day. It was like the Super Bowl of being in the infantry, of being a grunt. And it was game day every single day. And the Marines were winning. I mean, we were lighting up the scoreboard because that's where the enemy chose to fight us. It was Ramadi, and it was no secret because as my battalion fought in 2004 in the city of Ramadi, we gave it back to the people that weren't prepared to handle the city with security. They had no stability. The governance was bad. There was no infrastructure. The place was literally looked like a post-apocalyptic nightmare. I mean, it was just in shambles. So the city fell again, and they came back in. We had to retake the city in 2006. And it was remarkable because the 50 Marines that I had fought in the first Battle of Ramadi in 2004 said how bad the fighting was now. It was even worse. And there were more units, more American military units fighting in the city, and it had gotten that much worse. I was very lucky to have those guys with me, these salty, seasoned sergeants, all of 22 years old now. You know, that's the guys that were leading.
How old are you?
I was 35 at the time. So, you know, again, I'm looking at things through a different lens.
Yeah.
You know, I'm tasking these young kids, 18, 19 years old, to perform superhuman acts in the face of great danger with this complete chaos and uncertainty around them. And they never let me down. They continue to perform phenomenally and, you know, attack and kill the enemy with this unbridled ferocity, but they also did it with honor. And that's what makes me so extremely proud of these guys to this day. And the leadership, though, of those 22-year-old salty sergeants, you know, those guys really carried the day because at the low level, in the absence of my presence or my leadership, to be at that friction point, that critical place at any given time as we were fighting 5, 6, 7 times a day in direct contact with enemy forces, those guys made the difference. And they're remarkable. I mean, how well they adapt and improvise on the ground. It's just amazing.
So I want to go back just a little bit, and then I want to come back into this moment, right? So I feel like a little bit of like that book, In the Thin Air, where we've, you know, the book starts off where they're at 27,000 feet. It's chaos, and then he backs it up and goes kind of through like how these guys all got up to that point. And so for you, you've served a 24-year military career?
Correct, 24 years. And over that 24 career, I did, 10 deployments total, some in Iraq, Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, Japan, Europe, Mediterranean. So, that's over a 24-year career in, 60 different countries and a lot of different units.
So is that you re-signed, like when you originally sign up as 18-year-old?
I just turned 19 when I enlisted.
Okay, 19. That's crazy because that's what my daughter is over in Arizona. But so you enlist, and then you have a 5-year commitment, 4 year?
4 years, and during that time when I was enlisted, Desert Shield, Desert Storm kicked off.
Yeah,
got back from that. Figured out the error of my ways after having a not so stellar high school career. Went to college, got my degree in 3 years, which I say is attributed to the discipline I learned as a young Marine to apply that mission mindset to what I was doing in my studies. And then came back in, got my commission as an officer, and was, in the infantry until I retired in 2013. Yeah,
I want to jump on that just for a moment. I was in Michigan on Monday giving a speech to a large company, and the CEO actually asked me this question about, do you think people are naturally born with leadership skills in terms of the way he looks at his hires of people coming in? And I said to him, in my opinion, that some people are just genetically born that way, and then others just need to be guided and have the right mentorship, right? So in my case, at the University of Washington, my head coach, Don James, had taken the Pyramid of Success, which John Wooden had created, right? Which are essentially these 25 different blocks on individual and team goals to get you to a successful outcome. So it sounded like what you needed is to have your ass, kicked, whipped up, and just put into a position of success and shown how to do things the right way, right?
No, absolutely. That, I mean, I'm a case study on that. My first car was a motorcycle. I ran from the cops. I fought. I was an underage drinker. Had no guidance or discipline,
right.
And led a very high risk lifestyle as a teenager. And when I was introduced to the Marine Corps recruiters, these guys were the biggest group of risk takers I'd ever met in my life. I'm like, this is a perfect fit. So I enlisted. And then, again, you age and you mature a little bit. You gain some wisdom along the way. And I understood that, like, if I wanted to be a real leader, even when I was enlisted, I was always taking charge. I always wanted to be in charge of something. But I understood if I really wanted to make an impact or difference, I had to get an education. And that's what drove me back in, get my commission. And I was very fortunate to be selected as an infantry officer, which not everyone is, and be able to lead some of the best men and women at times in combat and throughout their careers.
So what was that drive, though? Because you come out of college, and as you take a step back, you go, okay, I have a degree, and I can now go do what most corporate America people do and go find a job and lead that type of life, or I can put myself back in harm's way. Was there just something, or is there something about the military lifestyle that just has a calling for you?
Well, I'd like to say it was this lofty calling, but, we talk about those people who are kind of natural born protectors like we did earlier in the program. And I think I was one of those because I was actually trying to get into U.S. federal service to the U.S. Marshals program or something of that nature. And there's this hiring freeze. And honestly, I couldn't wait tables and bartend for another year of my life until whatever fog lifted from the U.S. government. And a young sergeant calls me serendipitously and says, "Hey, sir, can you come down and run a fitness test and take a physical? I got a boat seat for you in Quantico in January." And it was like a spark lit in me. I was like, this was meant to be. And that's how it all evolved from there. But it was a little bit of fate, and also a little bit of my desire to want to give back to the Marine Corps because I was so successful in college. My GPA was much better than it was in high school. So I kind of wanted to give back. And I think that throughout my time in the Marine Corps, and even to this day, I don't think that my leadership has ever stopped. And that's important to me, to stay connected. Again, that power of human connection is, really something that sustains me, and I think is important to my Marines to know that I'm always accessible. They can always get a hold of me. And to the point where it's almost the last sentence in Echo and Ramadi is, if you guys are in need, I'm always here. I'm only a phone call away or a short drive, but I'm always here for you.
So what is the difference between an infantry officer and, say, a ranger or a SEAL or those other guys?
Well, we all have different mission sets. The Special Forces community has a lot more seasoned individuals. They're a little bit older. They get a lot more specialized training. And each one of them is tailored for the full spectrum of operations in the special operating community. They're very well tailored. And again, it's because of the amount of training where the infantry in the Marine Corps or in the Army, they receive basic entry-level training, and then we have these modules of training that prepare guys for anything within the spectrum, which we call Marine Corps the 3-block war, which can go anything from humanitarian assistance to full-scale kinetic operations where we're shooting, moving, and communicating and dropping bombs on the enemy. And that's been our traditional mission, to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. That's the mission of the Marine Corps Rifle Squad, where Special Forces guys are a little more finely tuned, as most people know. But it's interesting, having worked with a lot of those guys, and even in Ramadi, I was very fortunate to work with a former Special Forces commander, Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Ferry, who was in charge of Task Force 19 Infantry. And we had SEAL Teams 4 and 5, they ripped in and out. So he was very cognizant of how to leverage the skills of every player on the battlefield. And that was something unique, and I was very fortunate to have Chuck Ferry there conducting that chaos. I mean, to be able to do that, it really takes a special guy. And I think as Marines, he loved his Marines too. But he also understood what guys were good at and always fitting the right guy for the right job for the right reason. I think that was important to him.
Yeah, and what were you good at?
We were good at...
What were you? No, what were you?
What was I good at?
Yeah, personally. What were you good at?
Personally, I was good at understanding people. I think that, understanding what the Marines' needs were, what the needs of the mission were, and how to be creative. That was my talent, if I have to self-profess, is to be able to identify those friction points on the battlefield and figure out creative ways to do it outside of the book. Because let's face it, even now, we're still operating off of the best doctrine 1980 had to offer. And the military has adapted. I mean, can you imagine running plays from the 1940s and 50s? Like, they just wouldn't be effective.
Yeah.
So we've adapted, and we've had these new models of success that we've implemented. But there's a lot of leadership traits and challenges, but one of them that's not listed in there is compassion. And I think that I understood that to be an effective leader is you need to understand how your Marines are feeling and what's affecting them. And sometimes I get asked the question, well, do you think that because you were prior enlisted made you a better officer? My answer is always the same. No, it doesn't. It just gave me a better understanding of what those guys were going through, how valuable their time was, and really what it meant to take those short moments to understand when they needed a foot in the ass or they needed an arm around their shoulder. And that's not something everybody really understands when you're just operating solely off the playbook, because it's reading in between the lines that makes you more effective, I think, as a leader. And, you know, our military is comprised of so many talented people. I mean, they're artisans, they're electricians, they're musicians, they're sometimes writers. And to really understand that that's what makes them so unique, that's this brotherhood. To be able to leverage those skills, I think, was another, I guess, talent that I had, that we're not this lockstep organization that has to just march in column. I really leveraged that, not only on the battlefield, but in training as well, as we, you know, made that dance back and forth.
Well, I mean, there's nothing that you can ever replace when you talked about this. You talked about this earlier, experience and wisdom, right? And through that then gives you these other tools, because everything's not new. You've been there. You've gone through the war. You start to understand what these other guys are all about and what they're going through. And there's a guy that I had interviewed a couple of weeks ago, Lee Tomlinson, has nothing to do with the military, had everything to do with Hollywood and a crazy life and getting cancer and overcoming that. But, you know, one of the common themes that he was talking about when he got into the hospitals was this lack of compassion, right? And so I think that word runs true through so many different genres of things that people do. At the end of the day, we're all human. And we go through different things at different period of times of our life. And you need to take that word and really understand what your fellow mankind is going on. And I think the more intuitive that you are, it sounds like you were, you could really identify those guys that needed that, the better off leader that you're going to be, and I think just better person.
Yeah, it's integral to success. And again, Matt, you know, this isn't exclusive to me. There's plenty of Marine officers, there's plenty of Marine enlisted and soldiers that lead the exact same way. The ones that are not great at it are very few and far between. And trust me, just like in the NFL, those guys get eaten for breakfast pretty fast and they're shown the door. And that's why I think for listeners that don't understand what goes on in the military, those that are hesitant to let their sons and daughters enlist, they are led by the nation's finest. I mean, these men and women that are leading these members who raise their hand and swear to take an oath, they go through an entire year of training before they're entrusted to stand in front of a platoon of Marines. That's how long it takes them to get to that point. And throughout their career, they're continually trained and mentored and educated so they don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And I think that's something great that is exclusive to the U.S. military. That's why all the bumper stickers on the cars, I'll say, America number one, not just a bumper sticker.
Yeah. It's awesome. Last year, I was invited to go down to Tanzania with Chris Long, and he and another fellow in terms of from your side of the street, Green Beret, Nate Boyer, formed this organization called Water Boys. And so what we did is we raised a bunch of money. There was, I think, 6 NFL guys and 4 war heroes. We all went down there and built water wells. We didn't personally do it, but we raised the money so that it could happen in these different villages of the Maasai tribe throughout the Serengeti. It was incredible. We also climbed Kilimanjaro. Yeah, so I did that for my second time. But the thing that was so cool was that there was, I think, 4 or 5 different Green Berets, Marines that were on this trek. And 3 of them, Christy Ennis, she was above the knee amputee. Yeah. There was another guy that he had his calf shot, so he had that amputated. There's another guy that had shrapnel blow up on him and lost his vision. And so there's just these great examples of the human spirit, and just, you could see it, they're just gritty and tough, right?
Yeah,
that were alongside
survivors. I mean, look at Christy's a great example. Nate's a great example. I mean, they've seen both of our worlds. That's the great thing about Nate. And, we were like many guys in our network were your pen pals for a while, and Nate and I are in Bravo 748, and then we show up in LA and we are the Mighty, and we're at a Christmas party, and or at the golf tournament or something.
Yeah.
It's such a small world of people, again, who are willing to give of themselves and help other people. I mean, you just nailed two of them right there, Christy and Nate.
Well, he's in it for the right reason, and all those guys are. And it was just very inspiring, I think, to not just myself, the other NFL guys, to raise that money and see the giving that we were able to provide for these different people. But all the stories going up the mountain, and as much as they wanted to know more about the NFL stuff, as much as we, it was kind of a crisscross of information share going back and forth. So it was just, I don't know, it was very uplifting and probably one of the most rewarding expedition type trips I've been on. So it was really cool.
People like that are just very emblematic of what a lot of veterans and a lot of people that it's not exclusive to the military either, that deal with trauma throughout their life. And I don't care what type of trauma it is. I'm not saying because we were killing bad guys and kicking in doors in Ramadi, my trauma is any better than your trauma if you were in a car accident. We don't discriminate. And I think there's people, when they go through trauma and they compartmentalize it, and they have to press through that trauma to be successful. By giving and helping others is the best way to heal. And heal at a right rate. And sometimes it's just giving a little, and then you learn to give more. But really getting out and performing some sort of outreach to help others is the best way. And, a lot of people will ask me, how long did it take to write the book? And was it a healing process for you? And I always say no. It wasn't some catharsis where I hit the end and I was like, oh, thank God, I feel healed. I'll tell you where it comes from is it's not from the endorsements from 7-star generals or celebrities or public figures. It's from my Marines and those that understand what we went through. It comes from my Gold Star families, these extraordinary human beings that can lose so much and continue to love so much despite their loss. It's just remarkable how connected they stay to us, having lost a son or daughter, and carry that torch to bring light into the lives of so many guys that are still dealing with the darkness from having seen some of the worst things of humanity. But again, that connection and that validation of writing this story about Echo and Ramadi, and it is a bit of play on words, obviously.
Because you're an Echo company?
Echo company, and then there's also, the darker echoes of war that resonated long after we left the battlefield because of the effects of post-traumatic stress. And, some of the guys we've lost to suicide, unfortunately. But the positive things that come through in the book that are common to everybody are the leadership, the team building, the survival, and again, that power of human connection. And the best example I had was that really warmed my heart was an email that I wanted to share. It was from an Army staff sergeant who fought at Task Force 19 Infantry. And I got an email through my website, and he said, "Sir, I'm probably sure you don't remember me. I was a staff sergeant in the S1 shop, the admin shop with 19 Infantry, and I remember the night that Corporal Libby was shot. Corporal Libby was one of my squad leaders who was killed on December 6, 2006 in a 5-hour firefight. And he said, I remember that call when it came across the radio, and I raced across Route Michigan to the combat outpost of the aid station, and I remember the vehicles of your convoy rolling in through the chem lights and the dust cloud around them, the squeal of the brakes, and I remember your Marines carrying Corporal Libby out of the vehicle. And I remember your face. I remember everyone's face and every single step that you took as you tried to press into the aid station when your first sergeant stopped you." And at the end of his email, he said, "Yes, we made a difference. We did something that made a difference." And I tell you, you can tell I'm getting a little emotional just telling the story, but that's the type of validation when you hear people tell you a story. When I saw it one way, and he's looking at the reflection and seeing what was on my face, seeing what my Marines were doing as we raced to the aid to save one of our guys that had fatally shot, it meant everything to me. And I wrote him back and I said, hey, can I share that story? And he said, I'd be honored if you shared it. So that's just a real recent example of how people that go through so much, and I probably passed this guy 100 times, the months we were in Ramadi, and years later he said he hadn't thought about those events in almost 10 years. It was really amazing.
No, that is an amazing story, and so often it's interesting that the world that we see from inside out can either be the same or much different from the way the world sees us back, right? And when you're appreciated like that, it's a powerful thing. It's awesome. So let me ask you this. I want to talk about the book, and I want to frame it up first for all the people who don't know what the Battle of Ramadi was all about. So why don't you just set that up? Like, why were you there? Why did it get so intense?
Well, it's a historic battle, and it was important for me to tell the story of Ramadi because I was concerned that it was going to fall under the shadows of other great battles, the Fallujahs that made the headlines, Baghdad, Nowzad, Helmand Province in Afghanistan. But the war in Iraq had been boiling over, in 2004, and there were these little offshoots, and the insurgency was gaining momentum. So it had become this giant game of whack-a-mole up until about 2005, 2006, where we would hammer the insurgents down in one city. They'd go to ground. They realized they couldn't go toe-to-toe with us. And then they'd bleed out. They'd move to a different city, and then they'd try and occupy that to get a stronghold. And then we'd hammer them down again. But ultimately, they'd pop back up. So when President George W. Bush and General David Petraeus ordered the surge to flood the battle space with tens of thousands of additional troops, my unit was part of that with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit. So we were thrust back in. And as we did that as a coalition force, we were essentially trying to hammer down on every one of those pockets of resistance. So that's why we were sent back into Ramadi, was to retake that city. And it was interesting. I've talked to Pete about this. I've talked to a good friend of mine, Mike McNamara, who runs All Marine Radio, about how who fought in Ramadi, which was one of the toughest battles in the war. I mean, we make no bones about it. And it's never my battle was tougher than yours. Everybody fights. I mean, everybody does their part. You don't get to say it. It's like, I'll go to Ramadi, I'm going to pick this, or I'm going to pick Fallujah tour. It's not how it works. The Battle of Ramadi is really a 2-year fight. And one of the commanders at the time in 2004, who was a company commander, we just did a battle study. And what we're trying to do is figure out how we tie that together as a 2-year fight. Because it was. And the reason that it was is we won in 2004, but we gave it back, as I stated earlier, and then we had to retake the city. And then, one of the things that we haven't learned in the Middle East that has set this fight apart is none of us sit around and say, oh, woe is me, did we win, did we lose? And none of us were gypsies, and we didn't need a crystal ball to figure out, look, if we don't plant a flag in one of these cities, if we don't have a base here, if we don't establish some physical presence, we're going to be back. And turn back your history dial to May of 2015. Yeah. Where did ISIS pop up? Ramadi.
Yeah.
Because it was the capital of Al-Anbar province. It's key terrain, and that's why they wanted that city. So here we find ourselves again fighting in Ramadi. We're fighting in Al-Anbar province, and I think that's important. I always note to your listeners who may not see that in mainstream media, and that's why I love doing podcasts and shows like yours, is that it gives you an opportunity to let listeners know we are still fighting. There are still Marines and soldiers in Iraq. They're still in Afghanistan. They're still in the Horn of Africa doing our nation's bidding. And although they're not blasted on mainstream media, they're still there. And we need to remember that. We need to remember that those guys are fighting, and women. And we also need to remember that for every guy that's downrange or girl that's downrange, they leave a family behind, a Blue Star family. And there's Marines and soldiers we're still losing. Those Gold Star families are there. You need to reach out to them and find a way to connect. And it's a challenge I like to throw out there because, in athletics or in the military, we're big on challenging each other.
Yeah. Well, actually, Pete and I are trying to, I'm not trying, it's going to happen for me next year, but I'm trying to put this together, is bring war vet heroes like yourself and Pete together to do the 14 to 17 day trek from Kathmandu up to the base camp of Mount Everest. So it's going to be awesome.
That is awesome.
I can see you want to be on the trip. But it's really blending those two, former players, NFL players, and also war heroes, together, because there's just, again, so much common brotherhood about, again, apple and an orange in terms of the things, but just the commonality of we battled together, we went out, of course, completely different ways, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's just a lot of tie-in between the two, and we want to come together and see how we can, make that a successful venture.
Yeah,
so
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. So, as you were telling me this story, it's a 2-year battle. And just the curiosity to me, it's just like, we're sitting here right now in Hermosa Beach, right? I mean, one of the most beautiful areas in the world. It's calm, it's tranquil. It's, not today necessarily, but, there's not bullets flying by and craziness and helicopters and planes dropping bombs. But what is that like, and what's that do to your soul when you're living in that constant stress?
Well, I describe it again as friction. It's sometimes in Echo and Ramadi, it's an entire paragraph, friction, because it's such a dynamic environment. It is such a fluid environment. It's rapidly changing. And when you're fighting an asymmetric war, Matt, this irregular war, we literally lived amongst the people, as we, again, fought street to street, block to block, house to house. It was very difficult to identify an ununiformed enemy. And the front line is literally everywhere. Every corner you turn, every street you walk across, that's the front line. And I don't think people can grasp that. So when I wrote the book, I tried to describe that and how that was seen through the individual Marine's eyes and what the emotion was that they experienced. And I think that's really something, again, that sets this story apart, is that I didn't really mince any words. And when I did the interviews, I wanted to really capture the feeling, that emotion that these guys had every time they had to make life and death decisions on the battlefield at such a young age with so little information. So, yeah, I think you become desensitized. You understand that through your training, you're going to have to do certain things. And that friction, the explosions and the roadside bombs, and seeing the wake of destruction that the insurgency left behind through, murder and brutal beheadings and scraping dead bodies off the street that they left behind just to get their ruthless ideology across. They used people as human shields. It's not urban legend like you see in Scott McEwen's American Sniper or in the film. I mean, this happened. This was our reality. This is what we had to process. But you process it in a way and you put it away so you continue on the mission and you survive in that type of environment where it becomes more than training but survival. And for such young guys, I think it was important to me when we landed in Iraq and we were about to be thrust into the city of Ramadi. And I've told this story several times, but it was very important to me when I sat those 200 plus Marines down. I told my senior enlisted Tom Foster, who's like the equivalent of like the defensive coordinator. He's the assistant coach, and I said, get them all out there. I want to talk to the boys and take a picture. And they're all complaining. I don't want to take a photo op, sir. And then they all wanted to copy the picture, of course. Right. Marines aren't happy unless they're complaining. But I told them I wanted to talk to them, and it was important for me that they understood that what they were about to do for most of the guys they'd never seen before, especially on a scale of death and destruction they were about to see for these young 18, 19-year-old guys that had never been there. And Marines do a lot of things well. They absolutely shoot their rifles straighter than anyone on the battlefield. They attack and kill the enemy with this unbridled ferocity, but they also follow orders. So when I sat them all down there, I told them, you will have to go into combat and you will have to kill the enemy. And I am ordering you to kill the enemy. Combat is not a natural event. Humans create war. But you will kill the enemy. Because when that singular moment occurred, Matt, when they had to make that split-second decision to squeeze a rifle and feel that recoil as they look through their sights to take another human life, I never wanted them to hesitate. And I wanted them to do it because I was telling them to do it. I was ordering them to do it. And when they left that place, it was important that they knew it was my decision so they could leave the battle space with a clean heart and do what they had to do under my orders with honor and with pride. So all of those pieces of trauma that they brought with, I think, maybe that made it a little bit easier for them. And I think it was validated as I looked out into that sea of sturdy faces and those vets, those salty sergeants of mine, all 22 years old, were shaking their heads in approval.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and that would make sense to me in terms of helping to justify why you're there. So people aren't questioning what their morals are, as they value other human lives, because you don't naturally grow up wanting to kill somebody, obviously, right? But all that aside, this is Mark the civilian talking now, right? It's just when fireworks go off, right, on the 4th of July and these loud explosions, I kind of jump, I kind of step back. And so to have that, day in, day out to come would just make me like frazzled. And certainly there's been, maybe it's not you, but there's been several of your brothers who've been out there that have had to come back and deal with a lot of stuff. Going back to Nate Boyer, that he had invited me up to an organization that he runs once a week, where they bring in former athletes and former military guys, and it's really that crossover between ending their career and then starting like what's next. And there was a lot of guys in there that had a lot of stuff going on, and there's a couple of athletes that were sitting there, but there's a whole lot of military. And they were just from homeless to drugs to this to that. And part of it is the gap, and part of it was just their electrical system had been so fried that they were just trying to like reemerge back into this society.
Yeah, you can't unsee those things that you've done or witnessed or heard. And I'll share this. This is another one of my favorite stories. It's a great analogy, and it's not mine. It's from a great friend of mine, Adam Walker, who wrote an article called Post-Combat Residue. And he likens it to a story that he shares with me when this young Marine walks in his office, and he's a gunny at the time, and the Marine sees a coffee cup sitting on his desk, and he's like, "Gunny, that coffee mug is disgusting." He goes, "Why don't you wash that thing?" He's like, "Listen, stud, I've had this coffee mug since I joined the Marine Corps, and it's been on my desk, and I get coffee every single day, and I can scrub it as hard as I want and try and clean all that residue out of there. But that residue is the result of years and years of serving its intended purpose."
Survival.
Yeah. He says, "I'm not just going to throw the coffee mug away, because every day I come to work, it still gets me my coffee. It still serves its intended purpose." And that's how he likens this post-combat stress to post-combat residue. It's part of our game. It's part of our job. Just like first responders, if there's anybody that has a resume builder, and listing post-traumatic stress on it should be a bonus. I mean, these are how you grow from it is really the question we need to start asking ourselves, and how that makes you a better warfighter, how it makes you a better first responder. Those are the types of people that we want that level of experience. But the way Adam, framed it with the coffee cup analogy was just remarkable, because he's right. There's no way you can ever get rid of that residue. You just can't unsee those things. You just can't wash them away. But it doesn't make people broken. It doesn't make them weak. They still are effective, and we still value them. And that's an important message that comes across in this article.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I saw some videos of you in Ramadi, I believe, where it was just intense, just fire coming at you, right? And so as you, and look, you were there for a long time, right? So I'm going to ask you a question that's got multiple answers. You might say like, "Well, Mark, what was your favorite catch?" or something. I mean, I was a receiver and I caught the ball a lot, right? So what was what was one of the most intense firefights that you found yourself in?
December 6, 2006, I think, was the roughest we'd seen it, not just for my company, but the entire combined task force in Ramadi. It was a complex, coordinated attack, and I think maybe some of the video you saw may have been from December 6th. I don't know what Marines were doing shooting video in the middle of all that, but the firefight lasted for almost up to 5 hours, and it really redefined what we knew as fighting in that city. To be in a firefight for a couple minutes or a shootout is one thing when you're on a patrol and then you press on, but to be constantly engaged by what was obviously a complex, well-planned, coordinated attack on multiple hardened U.S. positions throughout the city. It wasn't exclusive to what our area of operation was dealing with. Our brothers next door in 1-6 were dealing with it. Task Force 177 Armor was dealing with it to the west. 1-9 infantry was slugging it out down in the Malab by Eagle's Nest, and they were crushing it. And if you could imagine, again, a 4th of July fireworks show.
On steroids.
On steroids, just boiling over. The city literally was boiling over with explosions and gunfire. And you didn't know if it was friendly, enemy. The sky was lit up with bright light and tracer rounds whizzing through it. And the worst part was, as soldiers and Marines, you're fighting and you're blasting into enemy positions. But if you're missing the intended target, there was this thing we call spillover, where friendly rounds don't hit the enemy, and we're fighting block to blocks. There could be another unit. This could have been our boundary from that Range Rover to here. There could be another unit over there, but there could also be enemy in between us. So if we were fighting, you had to always know where that round was going to land. And it was at that night on December 6th was absolutely the most intense fighting we'd seen, where we brought everything to bear, from small arms to hand grenades to machine guns to airstrikes to Apache helicopters. And I was very fortunate to have a rocket battery in Fallujah, these Army studs. I called in some Gimler's rockets, and these things fly 20 miles away at 40,000 feet and then come down top of this house and just suck the life out of it.
So you guys are calling out GPS coordinates? Is that how it works?
We have a grid map system in place that allows us to call for effective and safe supporting arms, whether the supporting arms are aviation ordnance or surface ordnance from conventional artillery or from rocket strikes. We didn't do a lot of mortars and things like that, where you drop down the tube and it's kind of a ballistic thing, because we were very concerned with collateral damage. Because just like we're sitting here today, there's families living around us, so we always had to be conscious of that. And we never took that for granted. And unfortunately, in war, there are people that die, or there are civilians that die that get caught in the crossfire. And you talked about the Marines, how you react to that jumpiness, or how do you react to that in a sustained environment day in and day out. Well, what I witnessed too was the local Iraqis who wanted peace. They were kind, peace-loving people. They wanted stability, but they had been immersed in this chaos for years and years and years, and they'd become so desensitized to it. The only way I could explain it is we were literally in the middle of a firefight in one part of the city, and I'm getting shot at, and I'm returning fire, and I see a kid and his mom, and they're standing there on the side of the road as if it was some sort of spectator sport. Like they're at Qualcomm Stadium watching the game that day. And I'm thinking, get inside your house. But to them it was, well, it'll be over soon and I'll just go about my daily business. But it was that type of surreal observation that really made you think how bad these people had it. So when certain sides of the aisle will squawk about how we should be occupiers in certain countries, is no one was going to take care of these people. Their government certainly wasn't. And at the end of the day, Marines were doing what Marines did best, and that is taking care of those that can't take care of themselves. And that's our mission. And we don't fight policies, we don't fight politics or strategies, we fight the enemy. That's what the Marines are trained at, and that's what they're great at. And they were doing it day in and day out the entire time we were in Iraq.
Well, something you said about 20 minutes ago is that the reason why you've gone back again and again and again is because there's this vacuum that's created. So it's not necessarily like we want to occupy these countries, but when you just evacuate like we did, just because everybody wants to pull the Marines out, then these guys come rolling right back in, and you got chaos again.
Yeah, I use another great football analogy. It's very very poetic. I say that we punted it through the grandstands of life by not establishing a presence over there and not being good students of our history like we were in the Pacific theater after World War II, in the European theater. I mean, you see, what do you see? Maybe it takes 50 years for it to take root, but we haven't even planted the seed, man. We haven't even begun to cultivate that relationship in the Middle East. And I don't know what the apprehension is, but again, I just wrote an op-ed about this, and I wrote pieces on it before, is the political system or the industrial system in concert with the military needs to go over to Iraq or countries like Iraq and show them what right looks like. I'm not talking about imposing our Western culture on them. I'm not trying to change their 5,000-year history. I'm just saying, show them what right looks like, because obviously we've dumped tons of money, tons of people, spilled plenty of blood in that country, and they're not willing to progress, or they don't know how to do it. the way it'll enable us not to go back every 10 years. I don't think any Americans want that. I know we don't want that. And I think certainly the Iraqis want stability, but I'm not quite sure that they've got their own playbook for how they're supposed to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think from an American standpoint, again, I'm talking from a non-military standpoint, civilian, which is a lot of times there's these hot spots, and then we view them as the game is over, just like we watch a football or basketball game or baseball game, right? And so when the game's over, everybody goes home. And that's just not the way it works, the way in your world, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, case in point, as we mentioned earlier, we still have troops fighting over there, but we need to figure out what winning is. And, when I was talking to Pete about that, because, Pete was over there and he worked at a lot of different levels of command as well. And, I told Pete, I said, well, how do we define winning? I mean, how are we as the guys who fought and slugged it out on the ground? How are we going to define winning? We know what winning is on the ground at the tactical level, but how do we come up with a metric of what winning is at the operational or strategic or political level, that top level? How do we figure that out? Who are the guys that fought there that really understand the ground game? How are they going to present that to our political and elected officials so we do get it right? I don't think we've come up with the answer yet.
Yeah.
Maybe if me and Pete, a couple other guys get
I think you guys should start running. So
brain trust, right?
So it's awesome you've written this book, bestseller, Echo in Ramadi, right, about this intense firefights that you guys had, in particular in 2006. And where can people find this book?
You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Barnes & Noble. You can find it at Costco. You can go to my website, echoinramadi.com, and on my website you can also order the book, but you can also see some pictures of the Marines. There's no pictures in the book. I didn't want to give it away. But you can see some pictures of these real-life heroes, and they're the real heroes. And you'll see pictures of them. You'll see some videos, but you can pick it up on Amazon now. And I always like to mention, too, that as the executive director of SaveTheBrave.org, that helps vets with PTS, a portion of the proceeds of the sales from Echo and Ramadi go to help vets with PTS.
That's awesome.
And I know that for a fact because I'm the executive director.
Yeah.
And it's on the back cover of the book, and that's how dedicated I am. Just like a lot of the guys we know and women we know that, you give first and then good things seem to follow. And, a lot of people often say, well, how do I help a vet? I said, thanks for your service, but I want to do more. Well, here's a start. Obviously, say thanks for your service. That's a great start. Mm-hmm. But you can buy a copy of the book, and a portion of the proceeds go to help veterans.
Yeah,
and, you're getting a great story, and you're helping support a great nonprofit that's really dedicated to connecting vets with PTS through outreach programs.
That's awesome. Well, I'd like to say thank you for serving. Seriously, those aren't just words; those come from my heart. And I've now been able to be very fortunate to meet a bunch of you guys who are brave souls who've stuck your neck out there and safely have come back. But I mean, I can't imagine. At 18 years old, I was on a scholarship ride at the University of Washington playing football, right? And that was my battle. And that doesn't compare anything to what these 18-year-olds have to go through. And it's been going on for centuries. And to actually to not just go there on your own. It wasn't like there was a forced draft, and then to actually want to re-enlist again and keep going back and back and back. And in your case, 24 years is really incredible. So thank you so much for that. We will promote the book in the show notes when the pod comes out. And is there any social, Facebook or Twitter that any handles that you have?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook at Echo and Ramadi, Twitter at Echo and Ramadi, and Instagram at Echo and Ramadi.
Sweet. So it's all roads lead to the same place.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Just Google Scott Huesing and everything pops up. You can't hide your footprint once you're in the grid.
Awesome. Well, listen, Scott, thank you so much for driving all the way up from Temecula on this crazy day of rain and also me moving. I'm sure...
Good luck up in the Sun Valley. It's given me a great excuse to visit a state I've never been to.
Well,
sad to admit.
You are always welcome to stay with me.
Great.
Okay, buddy. Thank you. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. If you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.